Welcome to the Let's Actuate podcast interview series, where we speak to leaders in VC, venture building, and future technologies, and we discuss the current state and trajectory of their domains. Let's dive in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Let's Actuate podcast. Great conversation lined up for you today. We've got Ron Diamond here with us. He's chairman and CEO of Diamond Wealth, where he invests alongside over 100 family offices, ranging from $250 million to $30 billion in assets under management. And he's also the host of the Family Office World podcast. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. So for the audience, could you give us a little bit of context as to what it is that you do and how you ended up here?
I'll start with how I ended up here, and then I'll go to what I do. So I graduated from Northwestern, and this was in 1987, and I got a job at Drexel Burnham. So for some of the younger people, Drexel was, Goldman on steroids. It was the most profitable firm on Wall Street. This was Michael Milken, Junk Bond, et cetera. So I was there. And then 2 years after I started, Drexel went bankrupt. And I remember vividly, I was 24. So it's not like I lost a lot of stock options, but I lost a good job. But I'm in the room with people in their 60s and 70s, and I'm watching a lot of mostly men literally cry. And in the late 80s, that usually didn't happen, right? I mean, it's probably more common today than it was back then, but it was a surreal scene. And I remember who was wearing what. I could remember scents. I could remember facial expressions. Wild. And my takeaway from that was that, I would always be extraordinarily loyal to people, always, but I would never be loyal to a company. And that was my take. And that's neither good nor bad. But because if it could happen to Drexel, it could happen to anybody, right? And then we saw it happen to Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and DLJ and all. You can go down the list. So based on that, I said I would always be loyal to people, not to company. And my plan was just to work at Drexel for 30, 40 years and hopefully run the company or run one of the divisions one day. And that changed. So I moved back to Chicago, and I started my own company. I started a hedge fund, which I had no intention of doing, but I was disillusioned with Wall Street. I was disillusioned with corporate America, et cetera. So in 1990, I moved back to Chicago, started a hedge fund, had no clue what I was doing. I just started it because I was really pissed off about, what happened. And it worked. And, we had certainly an element of luck because in the 90s, it wasn't, we had a lot of tailwind, so it wasn't that hard to make money in the 90s. We were pretty good stock pickers. We never had huge returns, but we beat the S&P 10 out of 10 years. And I grew it to about $250 million. And in the 90s, we were early. So people didn't know what hedge funds were, right? So we were very early in that. And then I sold the company. We got it up about $250 million, sold the company to a market neutral institutional firm, and kept 100% of the assets on board, stayed for 6 months, and then I left. Took a little time off, and then I started investing, which segues into what I do now. So what we currently do is I invest in, even though I made money in the public markets, it's very difficult to create alpha, at least in my opinion. No, I'm going to say objectively. It's hard to create alpha in the public markets today. You can create alpha in the private market, so venture capital, private equity, real estate, credit. So I just have money in index funds in the public markets. But in the private market, so what I do is I have a syndicate of about 100 family offices who invest alongside me. These are families anywhere between $250 million up to $30 billion. And we invest in private equity, venture capital, real estate, and credit. We do invest in funds if we have to, but we typically like to do direct deals. And I'll put in a couple $1 million per deal. I'll aggregate 50 to 100 million of other people's capital. We don't charge anything, so we're not a multifamily office, but I'm not doing it for self-list purpose. I do it selfishly because without the other 50, 75 million, I wouldn't be the first call. So I call it first call alpha. So basically that's what we do. We basically invest alongside a syndicate of large family offices in the private markets. And then I sit on a few boards, and I'm in the process of putting together a family office initiative at one of the top universities in the world.
Very nice. And I do want to ask about that a little bit later because I heard you talking about that on your podcast recently. But in regards to your transition from private equity into this community that you've built, really, this investment community that you've been built for yourself, what led to the creation of this from what you were doing before?
Um, it seemed to make the most sense. I mean, I remember when I was at Drexel for the 2 years before they imploded. If Google is going to go public, you're going to give and you have you're allocated 1,000 shares, you're going to give it to your wealthiest client. Well, that wasn't me, but now it is because I've aggregated everything with other people. So I call what I do first call alpha, where short term it might not make sense from a business standpoint because we certainly can monetize, but we don't. We choose not to. Medium term it might make sense. Long term, I think it makes a lot of sense and I look at everything from 10 years out because I'm completely aligned with all the investors and I invest in every single deal. And it's a way to create a network. And I think in the family office space, the first, second, third thing family offices want to know is can they trust you? And the fourth thing is what's your track record? And I think that there's a lot of great things that are happening in the family office world and a lot of not so great things. And I believe that as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the mid 80s, family offices are not going to replace, but are going to slowly disrupt private equity and venture capital because they've become an AUM game. But we can get more into that later.
Yeah, and you were kind of speaking to some of the best things that you see happening and some of the not so great things that are starting to happen. You want to speak to some of those?
The great thing, first of all, it's a better model. So right now, um, here's how it works. You've got a private equity. Private equity is a multi-trillion-dollar industry now. So a private equity firm buys a privately owned company from somebody in Des Moines, Iowa, and they're going to buy it and they're going to hold it. And they're going to hold it. I could tell you before they buy it how long they're going to hold it. They're going to hold it for 3 to 5 years because that's how they're compensated. And then what happens is they'll typically sell it to a second private equity firm. So you've got one group of smart people saying, okay, now it's time to sell. Another group of smart people saying, okay, now it's time to buy. And over the course of 20 years, you could see this one company change hands 3, 4 times. So if you look at the friction and the inefficiencies and the disruption in business versus a family office who can simply buy it, hold it for 20 years, and then sell it and let it compound, the results aren't even close. So objectively, not subjectively, objectively, the family office model is a better model because there's no shot clock. The problem is that we're so early in this game, very few families can execute. So while, yes, it is a superior model, almost nobody could do it. I believe over the next 5 to 10 years, more and more will, and that's when we'll continue to see the disruption with the private equity industry and venture capital.
I love that. And I remember you referred to that longer timeline as patient or permanent capital.
Correct.
Yeah.
They don't have, in an ideal world, Warren Buffett said the ideal holding period for a company is forever, right? A private equity or venture capital firm can't do that because that's not how they're compensated. So I think this is going to change stuff, and I think that as more and more family offices become sophisticated and become more savvy and build the team up and compensate these people, they'll be competing directly with the Carlyles and Blackstones and KKRs of the world. Some can do it now, but not a lot. But that's going to change.
Got it. And I'm assuming what you hinted at earlier that you're putting together in conjunction with the university contributes to enabling these family offices to set up that starting infrastructure?
Yeah. So what happened is the problem right now is a lot of these conferences, and I keynote a lot of conferences, and I'm friends with a lot of the people, and they're good people. But a lot of them are pay to play. So if somebody's speaking, they might be smart, they might not, but they spent 25 grand, and that's why they're speaking, and that's not why you should listen to them. So the people who invest alongside me, and I'll keynote a lot of conferences, they'll say, which conference should I go to? And there's a few I'd say go to, but most of them I say just don't attend. And that's the reason. So I wanted to put together, this was about 5 years, 4 year, 4.5, 5 years ago, right when COVID was starting. I chaired the Disruptive Technology Center, the advisory board at Stanford University. And I said, let's put together a conference that I would actually tell people they should go to, that I would want to go to, right? It was educational. So what we did is, this during COVID. Um, I don't want to put a conference together. I have no background, and nor do I have a desire to do it. So I went to EY and Kirkland and Ellis. I mean, Kirkland's probably the top firm, certainly in my opinion, legal firm in the family office space, and EY is a phenomenal firm. So we worked with those two firms, and I said, look, I'll do two things. You guys put the conference together. I will get you world class speakers, and I'll pick the content, and that's all I'm going to do, and you guys do everything else. So what we did is we put together a conference that I would go to. And the beauty there is we didn't have to make money, because we're just basically, we're doing it through Stanford. So um, I'll give you three examples. We had Paul Carbone speak. Paul's a friend who runs the family office for Tony and JB Pritzker, extremely successful investor. And he was speaking on how they do due diligence with the Pritzker organization. He wasn't pitching a fund. He was just saying, we've got a team of 65 people. Here's how we vet deals. Here's how we do due diligence, and this is what we do. We had Tim Callahan, who was Sam Zell's partner in real estate, talking. He wasn't pitching Fund Four. He was just opining on what he thought was going to happen to the office market. Because remember, during COVID, people didn't know if people would ever come back to offices. So it was really interesting because people, he's one of the top guys in the world, and he was just giving his thoughts. And then lastly, we had Denise Illich, who's a good friend from Little Caesars family. She, along with Dan Gilbert, her family helped to rebuild Detroit. And she was talking about charity, and she wasn't asking people to donate to her philanthropy to rebuild Detroit. She was just saying, if you're going to be philanthropic, it doesn't matter what your cause is, you might want to run it more like a business. And here's kind of what we got right, here's maybe what we did wrong. And it was just learning experiences. So it was pure educational and pure content. And we had 880 families from 6 continents on a Zoom call for 2 days. And so that was sort of like the aha moment when you realize, like, yeah, I kind of knew that if you put together a conference where you didn't have to make money and it was just content, because there's a huge demand for that. Because right now, the problem is that family offices are very inefficient today. They're very fragmented, they're very siloed, and the model doesn't work. Only 25% of families make it to the second generation, 10 make it to the third, and 5 make it to the fourth. And it's a new industry. 68% of family offices started since 2000. Half of those started since the crash in 2008 and 9. So it's a very, very new industry. And we're maybe in the second, maybe third inning in the evolution of family offices.
Wild. And I'm not surprised to hear that the education bit is filling the need and paying a gap in the industry. You see that pretty much across the board. I was chatting about that even with the standardization of education VC in general. Um, that's an awesome sounding event that you did. Are you planning on having another?
Yeah. So what we did, I'm in the process. I built up the family office initiative at Stanford, and now I'm taking that, and we're one of the top schools in the world. It'll be announced publicly in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks, but I'm
Nice.
helping to create a family office initiative at one of the top schools in the world. And the goal is basically to put together a community of family offices where it's a safe space, nobody's being sold anything, and they can just share best practices. And that's what's needed in the industry.
Yeah, I, I, I can imagine so. Um, and kind of flipping back to other things that are needed in the industry and speaking to what are the pains of family offices as they mature as a model. You also spoke about compensation. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, family offices typically don't have it right. So right now, a family office, if they're going to hire a kid out of Stanford and pay him $250,000, most, not all, but most family offices look at that as a cost. It's going to cost me $250,000 to hire this kid. If Blackstone or Carlyle or KKR hires a kid out of Stanford and pays them $250,000, they look at that as a potential $20 million profit center. So it's nuanced, but if you look at it as a cost center versus a potential profit center, it's how you're look at the lens through which you look at the world. And until the family offices get this right, and some do, but most don't, so I think what's going to happen is, in order to attract the top talent, because I think that you've got $10 trillion in capital in family offices. You've got $84.4 trillion coming downstream from the baby boomers, the next gen, in the next 20 years.
Wow.
So we're about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. And I believe that in 5, 7, maybe I'm wrong, 10 years, the top kids out of these schools, they're not going to want to get into private equity or venture capital, which they do today. I think they're going to want to get into family offices, but they're not there yet because they don't even know what a family office is.
Mm.
So that's what we're going to try to change. And I think we have to do it at a university level because their agenda is research and they don't have to make a profit. And that's where we're doing it. So it worked really well at Stanford. And the new initiative, which will be announced publicly, we've put together an advisory board of 50 of the largest families in the world who are part of it. So we're working on doing this together. So I think we're at an inflection point.
Perfect. And then I'll make sure to circle back with you um, to post those resources and the link once that actually does go live, especially since it's so near term. That's really exciting. And a little bit more about the infrastructure, just for any listeners that might be, and this might be an interesting bridge, but might be in the emerging family office space, excuse me, or the emerging manager space. But let's talk about family offices for a second. What are some key considerations that they should take when establishing that really lean infrastructural foundation in getting started?
Well, first of all, there's no metrics. Remember, this is a new industry, right? I mean, in the U.S., it probably started in the late 1800s, with Rockefeller and Vanderbilt. I mean, you could go back 1,000 years, maybe say the Medici's were the first true family office. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, it started in the U.S. in the late 1800s. But again, 68% started since 2000, so it's a new industry. I think that one of the things is um, a lot of the family offices that exist shouldn't exist. The reason I say that is, there's no metric on how much you need to have a family office. In order for it to make economic sense, to have a single family office where you're paying your own admin, your own accountant, your own lawyer, your own team, you need a bare bones minimum of $250 million. If you have less than that, you're better off going to a multifamily office, a firm like Crescent, or one of these firms where they're built for firms that are 10 to 250, $300 million. There's a lot of family offices, and I don't judge anybody on anything, but there's a lot of people who sold their company for 20, 30, 50, $100 million, which is a lot of money. And they start a family office. It's just not enough, because if you reverse engineer it and do the math, rather than paying your own admin, your own accountant, your own legal, you're splitting the cost with other families, and that's what multifamily office. So the growth is really going to be in the multifamily offices, not in the single family offices. So I think the first thing is people have to understand how much do you actually need to do it. Secondly, I think what happens is a lot of times people have a liquidity event and they take their foot off the gas pedal and they say, okay, now I'm going to start a family office. If that's the way you're going to do, and again, I don't judge anybody, give it to a multifamily office, because unless you're going to run this like a business, like your full-time business, you shouldn't do it, because you're not going to do well. Now, if you have enough capital and you compensate the people the right way, and you have the resources and your network, it's a game changer. But we're very, very early in that right now.
Got it. And then with these kind of emerging family offices that are just starting their process, let's assume that they've met somebody like yourself and gotten involved in some of these earlier stage programs. So they're gaining the insight into how to infrastructurally set that up. Um, when they start assessing potential investment opportunities, one thing that we hear or in the VC space, sure, you have your generalists, but like specialization, you have a lot of perspective into context. so it gives you an advantage for decision making. Um, and I know that you've spoken about this before in the family office space, but how have you seen it work well versus not when it comes to actually starting to source deals, establish deal flow, and analyze what may or may not be good investments to make?
Well, specific to venture, look, I think venture is a phenomenal asset class. It can be extremely lucrative. It's also very hard. And unless you do venture full time, you shouldn't touch it. You should outsource it to other people. And what was happening is post crash, pre COVID, I don't care what you invested in, you made money. Private equity, venture capital, real estate, credit, interest rates were zero, Bitcoin, everything, stock market, everything went up. So what a lot of the families did is they said, well, why should I pay a manager in venture 2 and 20 if I could do it myself directly and pay no fees? And they were right until they were wrong. And then about 2.5 years ago, when they started jacking up interest rates, now these deals, not only were they not making money, they were actually losing money. So I think we're going to see a pullback, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity for people in the venture capital industry who are experts in this, because now a lot of families are saying, wait a minute, maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, and maybe there is more of a skill set to doing this. And so I think they're going to reevaluate. They're starting to reevaluate how they do, particularly with venture, and they're going to outsource that now. And they're going to realize there's a reason you're paying 2 and 20. If you go to a top doctor for a heart surgeon, he's going to be more expensive if he's the best. But so people are starting to realize that right now, and I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of people in the venture capital space to come into these family offices who've been burned by direct deals from families because they didn't have the bandwidth to understand it, and now they're going to outsource it. So I think it's a really, really interesting and very, very favorable time for people in the venture community to come into the family office world and say, you made money in real estate. You handle that lane. Let us handle what we know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you invest though with your group and in your community of family offices, you invest directly, correct?
Correct.
Would What made you go the direct route where it might be more advantageous for family offices to consider letting experts in VC run the VC side of things?
What I've done is I've surrounded myself with people that are a lot smarter than me in various verticals: venture capital, private equity, real estate, credit, sports, whatever it is. So I've got a team. So if we're going to do a deal, early stage deal, I've got a number of professors at Stanford who I can go to help with that. So by surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, that you trust implicitly, and just kind of delegating, it's not a complicated model. And that's basically all I've done.
Not surprised to hear that. And we're doing a bit of that in various initiatives here as well. As my founding partner Chris likes to say, we've normally found ourselves to not even be the smartest person at our own desks in a lot of situations, especially in the industries that we're in.
My father was a banker and very successful, and he would always tell me, you could always tell when he had a board meeting who the lawyer was and who the entrepreneur was. He said the lawyer comes into the room, and typically they want to show that they're the smartest guy in the room. The entrepreneur comes to the room and they just want to find the smartest guy in the room, right? So I look at myself like that, as far as all I try to do is surround myself with the people that are smarter than me. And if you could just take your ego and, just say, okay, I'm fairly good at certain things, but I'm not really good at other things. The biggest obstacle that a lot of these families have is the ego of the founder, because they did great, in business, selling Beanie Babies or 5 Hour Energy or whatever it was,
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're good at everything, right? So you've got huge amounts of capital in very inefficient hands right now, and I think that's starting to change. And I think that through the university that we're doing this with, we're going to try to put guardrails and kind of institutionalize what the family office market is, because right now
Love
it
that.
is fragmented, it is siloed, and it is very inefficient.
And a question during this time where that infrastructure isn't in place, and even over like the next 6 months to a year, as that's becoming more widely acknowledged, you're still going to have that gap, right? So what advice actually might you have for emerging managers that are fundraising and reaching out to family offices, knowing that you're going to have the handful that are a little bit more mature organizationally and understand VC as an asset class and the nuance that's involved, versus these less mature organizations?
Well, I think the timing is great for people in the venture capital community. I think it's ideal because 5 years ago it wouldn't have been because everyone was making money. So people felt that, they don't need the venture capital guys. I think what happened is when they jacked up interest rates and then not everything worked, people realized there's an actual skill set to doing what you guys do. And again, venture more than anything, more than private equity or real estate. If you don't do venture full time, you shouldn't touch it because while it can be extremely lucrative, it's extremely difficult. And if you made your money in venture and that's your space, you can stay in that lane. But if you made your money selling widgets or a manufacturing company or in real estate, focus on that, outsource the rest. And I think that's what's going to happen.
Awesome. And I'm interested in your perspective. So, touching a little bit more toward the patient and permanent capital, the longer timelines that family offices have, we're in an interesting space where we focus on deep tech and aerospace, which are significantly longer timelines. And we have our own approach to creatively supporting that, and adding dynamism to a business model. But hearing the concept of this longer term vision from family offices, I started getting this mental picture where there's an interesting melding of concepts between venture and family offices timelines supporting some of these tougher, more robust, more emerging technological verticals. And I'm just wondering what it might look like where the type of funding, the venture funding, paired with non-dilutive funding from the government and all the other things, right, for deep tech and aerospace companies, especially now, is not only vital, it's foundational to get these companies off the ground. But it's paradox, right? A lot of the companies in the technology take a lot longer to get to the point of maturity. What considerations might family offices take that want to start playing in these spaces? And is there a consideration somewhere in between a family office model or a VC model that we might start to see emerge?
Well, remember, there's $84 trillion coming downstream from the baby boomers to the next gen in the next 20 years.
That's wild.
And the younger generation is much more savvy than the older generation in technology. So, when I was in college, I went to Northwestern, we had a computer lab where I got to use it for half an hour. I had a typewriter in college. So now, I'd buy a pair of jeans. I would just buy it if it fit me. My daughters want to know not only does it fit them, but who makes them, how do they treat their employees, and they got access to all that stuff because of the internet. So I think that you're just in a different world, and I think that it's a generalization, but in general, younger people are much more comfortable with technology. I mean, I would argue that I've got beautiful daughters, 20 and 23. If you look at my generation versus my daughter's generation, you can go back all the way to and including the Industrial Revolution, and there's never been a bigger change in society and in technology than there has in the past 25 years. And with artificial intelligence, that's going to continue to get even more so. So I think we're at a period where the younger people are much more comfortable with it. It was the young kids who would buy these things called Bitcoin. It was the older people who what are you doing? So I think there's a comfort level, and my kids grew up with the phone as an appendage to their hand. I mean, so they have access to it. So that they're much more comfortable with technology than people in my generation.
And what do you see that transition looking like, or what advice might you have for the transition that I would assume needs to take is going to take place, but needs to be planned for within these organizations?
It will 100% happen. I could be wrong in timing. It might take 4 years rather than 2 years, or six
Sure.
years rather than four, but it can't not happen. And with this money transferring hands, and with with how quickly technology, especially with artificial intelligence, how rapidly the world is changing. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's weekly. It's crazy.
it's mind-boggling. I mean, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence by any stretch, but I play around with it, and it's scary what it could do. And I think it's going to do a lot of, the good stuff is, I think it's going to be the biggest value initially will be in healthcare, because they could sequence stuff and they could do things. A computer can do things that could take minutes. It would take weeks or years sometimes for humans to do. So I think that's going to be the biggest change. I think we're at the point now where, remember when the dot-com bubble came out, you know whatever you did, you just added .com to your company, and then the valuation went up. And I do think you're seeing some of that with AI.
A little bit, yeah.
But I do think that AI is not only real, but it's going to have massive changes on the way the world works. I did a keynote at Stanford, and the professor who spoke before me had a picture of a fire, a picture of a wheel, the word internet, and the word artificial intelligence. And what he was saying is that as transformative from a societal standpoint as fire was, because we needed to cook, right? And then as the wheel became, because then you needed to get mobile, and then the internet came. That's how transformative that artificial intelligence is going to become. So I think that it's a fascinating time, where things are changing just at crazy speeds, and will continue. So it can't not happen. It's just a question of how do you monetize it, and not all the companies that are AI are truly AI companies,
Yes.
and they're trying to get better valuations by using the word AI, just like the .com company said, we're a .com, so we're more valuable. That'll flush itself out.
Yeah. And you are starting to see a lot of noise, but I think the fleshing of it, the flushing out of it has started to happen. Uh, when when it comes to like the organizations, and this is where I'm asking a question from lack of perspective into how offices operate, but incorporating the younger perspective and transitioning into um, the generation that's more familiar with these emerging technologies. Is there something that they can do, or considerations that they should have to facilitate that more smoothly?
It's a great question. A lot of it comes back to ego, right? Grandpa made the money, and he made the fortune in real estate, or wherever he made it. And then you get a 25-year-old kid, who wants him to invest in this thing called Bitcoin, or some of these deals, and there's there's a mismatch, right? They don't get it. So I think that in order for it to happen, I think that you know, the older generations are going to have to rely on the younger generations. I mean, what's interesting is before the internet came out, I mean, you could almost never have younger people almost could never educate older people who've been doing it for a lot longer. Once technology changed and the internet came out, now with artificial intelligence, a lot of the older generation will learn from the younger generation, and that's flipped, right? So I think it's a mindset. And yes, they play baseball with your kids, and now you're hiring them as your CIO, but you have to realize that you're in your lane and they're in their lane, and this is the world. And unless if you start if you're myopic and just think because you made money selling widgets that you're going to understand technology, you're going to get killed. So you have to be able to delegate and rely on the younger generation. I mean, my IT person in my house is my 20-year-old daughter. Like she knows more than I don't even want to argue. It's just like something needs to be fixed. I just call her, and she's better at it than me because it's part of how she's programmed, how she's wired.
And interestingly enough, I'm even observing that, and I'm just in my late 30s, where there's even a chasm growing in perspective and in context with the technologies that are starting to emerge in the familiarity. Right, like I didn't grow up with a phone in my hand from being a child, but at a very young age, right? And it's very interesting to see how quickly it's shifting again, like we were speaking to, especially with the emergence of things like artificial intelligence. I wonder what or if this new economy in space, being a new industry, a new territory, new infrastructure is required, might be a tangential phase of that evolution. Like you mentioned, the professor that went up before you and kind of highlighted the internet and artificial intelligence. How do you see like new and emerging markets? There's not many of them left. Uh,
Well, space is a perfect example. I mean, I think that a family office is a great organization to invest in that because it's not going to happen in a year or 2 years. They've got a much longer term time frame. It it doesn't have to turn a profit in 3 to 4 years, or else they're going to nix it. So I think that space is a perfect example of something where it does require long-term capital, permanent patient capital, and family offices are perfect people to invest in that. And if you look at the wealthiest people, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and they're all getting into space, right? So I think that it's going to change. It's just what I don't know is, is it going to be 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? I just know that in 20 years, it'll be a lot different.
and we see a lot of the key infrastructure starting to be put in place, and there's a little bit of buzz that's being created around the industry, which is good because it means more eyeballs, more awareness, uh, more expertise coming out of the woodwork and being more publicly available and referenceable. How, and just for the technologist, the future technologist audience of ours that are building in deep tech and aerospace and approaching family offices that might be very foreign to the concept. What are some considerations that they should have when approaching family offices with opportunities in these emerging markets?
It's a great question. So one of the things that's interesting is with family offices, if they're going to invest with an emerging manager, the first, second, third thing they want to know is, can they trust this person? And the fourth thing they want to know is, what's your track record, what's your background? Now that's flipped institutionally. So if you go to an
Mm,
institution, an endowment model, they're the first thing they're going to want to know is, all right, what's your 1, 3, 5 year track record, what's your whatever, and then they'll try to do due diligence on the person. The family op, the biggest takeaway I would say is the family offices. It's not that all of a sudden people wanted to loved managing money. They just stopped trusting Wall Street. So this is a question. It's a relationship business, a question of trust. So don't come in and talk about how smart you are or what college you went to. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important because it is, but the fact that they can trust you transcends how smart you are.
in a world where things are much more remote and disconnected physically, not completely, right? Like we have the pockets of activity all over. But what does it look like to build real relationships and facilitate? And it is like the $1 billion question in humanity, right? Um, but facilitate trust and facilitate the relationship building where there's a lot more space between and screens between us.
Here's what's going to happen. The people who meet on Zoom and it's more convenient and it's much more efficient are going to do okay. And the people who take the time and meet these families in person are going to develop the relationships. My daughter's 23 and she's got a remote job, and she thinks that, and that's great. I think it's horrible. I mean, when you're 23, I had role models, I had mentors, you learn by listening. So I think for the younger generation, it's a horrible thing. And yet that's what they want. But the people who I think are going to succeed in these companies are the ones who are there because they're going to learn through osmosis. I've been in business 35 years, so I've got relationships and, networks, et cetera. So it's not as challenging for me. But I think that that's something that a lot of companies are, struggling with, that the young people don't even want to work with others, and because they think it's cool to be able to work out of their pajamas and start at 10. And I get it, but what they don't realize is they're going to be missing out on the opportunities to learn from people, because all the best lessons that I've learned, anything that I've learned, has come from observing, and that's in person. So I think that, well, this is a podcast, so I'm, meeting you over. It's better than a phone, right? But it's much different than doing it in person. And I think in person, I think you're going to see a backlash. I do think that more and more, as this plays out, and people start realizing the people who are really succeeding are the ones who are in the office and developing relationships, I think we're going to see a change. I don't think it'll ever go back to where it was, but I think more and more people are going to be working in for businesses in person.
Yeah, I'm assuming the same, and I think the gap there is the missing context, right? Like they've never been in that kind of environment in person where you get to understand and feel the impact of, like you were saying, osmosis, observation. Um, it definitely is a different level of experience,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm on your side that we're going to start to see that shift as well. I still wonder, though, and especially being in different places, what the evolution of that is, where the relationships might start a little bit more remote, but then be built in person. And, like, let's say we travel out to New York or Colorado or San Francisco to grow those relationships and to work on initiatives locally and build the relationships. But what does it look like to kind of reach out and build that initial? Because I'm sure you could relate. I can't tell you how often daily my inbox on LinkedIn is bombarded, and I'll form a connection with somebody, but then I'll get the pitch right after. And it's like, just say hi, ask how I'm doing. It's cool to connect. Let's chat about it, like common interest. Um, for emerging managers in this new space that do want to be more genuine and are interested in the deeper relational building, what does optimal, I guess, virtual outreach look like to kick that off? Or is it more advantageous to show up in person and start locally and literally knock on doors?
Well, look, it's a balancing act, right? So I think you could certainly develop a relationship or start a relationship over the phone or over Zoom, but in order to cultivate it and nurture it,
Yeah.
you need to, in my opinion, I'm fairly certain I'm right. You need to do that in person. I mean, human beings are not wired. We're wired to pick up verbal cues and nuances and body language, and you can do it over Zoom to an extent, but in person it's just much different. And I think we're going to see a big change in that in 5-10 years.
I think it's like over 80 or 85% of all communications nonverbal. And there's innately an energetic factor to that. It's not just looking at somebody, right? Because it's unconsciously
We had
observed.
so I run a Tiger 21 group. It's like a peer-to-peer group, like, sort of like YPO.
Nice.
And we had a great speaker, Annie Sarnblad, and she's the top expert in the world on facial recognition. And basically, what she could do is she could look at, you're smiling now. She could look at, say, is that sincere or not sincere? Or, if you do this with your chin, or or you do this, and it's just amazing because, I mean, we are still mammals, all right, and kids were wired that way since We've been wired that way since forever. And like an infant can, who doesn't, if you don't give eye contact to the infant, they sense it. So I think that stuff like that, and again, it's a niche field, but um, nonverbal communications and cues are just as, if not more important than verbal cues.
I love that. That's a great call out. Thank you. And I'm interested what some of your long term goals and vision is, even outside of Diamond Wealth and the current initiatives that you're working on. But what about personally?
I consider myself, I'm very fortunate. I focus a lot on gratitude. I know a lot of miserable billionaires, and I just look at, um, you have to, you have to focus on, like, everyone's got stuff going on in their lives, right? And that's just not fun and sometimes really bad. But everyone's also got stuff that's like really, really good. And the way I think humans are wired is like, and we had to be wired this way from a caveman days, is like you have to be wired one way. But I think to focus on, we're now, we could do most things. We don't need to go out and hunt for food. And I think we're at a point now where you could look at things through the lens of, people can be more trusting and work with in groups with people more. So I just think that where we are, I think that like the phone, the iPhone started in, I think, 2010. That's going to be the new smoking for my kids' generation.
Mm,
I, I would say there's more, the amount of depression, anxiety, and suicides amongst 18 to 25-year-olds, which is the exact time when the
yeah.
iPhones came out, when they were 10 to 13 years old, is off the
Interesting.
charts. And the only variable is the iPhone. And kids now today, they don't make eye contact with people. They
Mm,
multitask. They're talking to you, but they're looking at their phone and they're talking to you. Um, it's really unhealthy. And I think that Social Dilemma was an interesting movie, but I just think there will be a lot more studies coming out. This generation that grew up with the iPhone, it, there's a lot of bad things that are going to come from that. Um, Social media, um, there's benefits to it, but in general, particularly for younger people, particularly for girls, it's horrible. It's horrible. And these girls see these other girls. They weigh 100 pounds and they're in Paris and they're tan and they're doing all these wonderful things. And it's like, well, that's not my life. So they get depressed. And I just think that the social media, there's going to be a backlash against social media. I mean, there is right now, but the problem is the genie's already out of the bottle. So if you give your kid an iPhone, good luck taking it away. So it's hard. But we didn't know any better. I mean, when the flip phones came out, it was fine. Nothing changed. It was only when they had access to this information and social media that things started to change. And I think that you'll see a pushback, a societal pushback, but you've also got the tech companies who've got the algorithms who know,
yep.
who want to get these young people hooked on Facebook or different or on Instagram, and they're pretty good at it. It's like the food industry, right? Food industry, that it's not that they're evil, but many of them are. They can make a nacho cheese Dorito, like just the right amount of sugar and spice and whatever to make it addictive,
Hooked.
and
Yep.
they're pretty good at it. So I think we're at an inflection point. But I do think that this generation, my kids' generation, are going to be hamstrung by the technology they grew up with.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what's on the other side of the fence as well. We have the same I have the same assumption, at least, that you're going to start seeing a higher value on in-person connection. Um, Speaking back to what we were just talking about, right? And then I do wonder what the balance is, the blend is of the hyper connection that the internet and all this immediate access and hyper intelligence uh, facilitates, plus the innate desire and value that we have on human experience and human connection and in-person experiences. It's going to be interesting. And what are some goals that you'd like to see within like the next 10, 20, 30 years for yourself personally?
I'd like to see my daughters thrive. I'd like to see, from my family, do very, very well. I'd like to see going out a circle, like friends and relationships to do well, and then big circle, from a societal standpoint, I'd just like to see people be just nicer, just like less divisive. I mean, our our world is not, you watch politics and it's just, I can't watch it anymore. It's just like
I know.
our world is not super far right or super far left. We're either center right or center left. I mean, we're close to the center, and we're not the extremes that we are politically right now. And what I'd like to see is people just realizing we're all in this together, right? At the end of the day, I was on a podcast the other day and I talked about, you look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and you know there's a hatred, like they just, there's a visceral hatred towards other people because of what they believe. My kids went to a camp called Agawak. It's a great camp in Wisconsin, and they have teams. They have a green team and a white team, and the green team and the white team are like brutal. They're just enemies during camp because you're on green and you're on white, and they talk about it all summer. But at the end of the day, they go to Agawak, right? So yes, the green team won or the white team won, but they're at camp. And I think that's what we have to look at from a societal standpoint, and that's what we don't do a good job. So I'd love to see more of that.
I was actually talking to my wife about that a couple of weeks ago because you do see the polarity, right? I was like, I'm really looking forward to the day where we realize this doesn't work anymore. And we just see the evolution where there's no parties, there's just people and perspectives. And at least that initial slate is a little bit more balanced, where you have the option of optionality because you realize you're in it together and you can have a few different choices on the table.
I disagree with people vehemently on different policies. I don't hate them. I just disagree with them. But you could disagree vehemently and still like or love the person.
Yeah, exactly. And you get that in all regards, with all perspectives, and in all categories of things, even in venture, right? Like you'll see people pass on deals that are just completely opposed to technology that's emerging, and people that buy in, and one of the two are going to be right. But at the end of the day, it's okay. You're in this together if we're all figuring it out, right? Yeah. Awesome. I've loved the conversation. Thank you very, very much for it. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share with the
No,
audience?
I think first of all, thank you for having me. I think you did a terrific job. Wish you the best of luck with the podcast and with your firm. No, I think you did a terrific job, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on. The perspective is going to be exponentially beneficial to the few that are out there that can take the nuggets from it. We'll have your contact information below. But how would you most prefer people to reach out and get in touch with you?
Well, I have somebody who handles social media for me, so it's familyofficeworldmedia.com is usually the easiest way to do it, and I'm fairly active on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And definitely be sure to check out his podcast, the Family Office World podcast. It's great. The conversations are extremely insightful. Ron, thanks again for your time. And to everybody that's out there, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you. Hope you have a great one.
Thank you.